This is an SM Media production. Hello folks, and welcome to the latest episode of the Rangers Journey right here on SM Media. I'm Scott Pike. It's an absolute pleasure to be your host as always. We are now hitting episode 12, 2008 to 2011. What happened when Walter Smith led Rangers to 3 in a row under the most shoestring budget any manager will probably ever have in the top of Scottish football. To join me on this part of the journey, it's a pleasure to welcome Chris Bett of the Fourth Official. Chris, it's a pleasure to welcome you on. Thanks for joining me.
No worries at all, Scott. It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for asking me. Can I just say as well, Scott, before we start, mate, much respect to you and your good lady. He's obviously went through quite a tough time. I watched from afar, and you were so courageous, as was your daughter, mate. So absolutely, my heart goes out to you for that. But I've got so much respect for the both of you, mate.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate that, mate. It was unexpected, but it means a lot as well. And again, it's just great to be back doing what I do, and hopefully we keep it going. Yeah, it's the best. It's the best therapy doing podcasts like this and looking back at memories. But let's get into talking about these 3 years now, Chris. Before we get into talking about and kind of going through it in depth, is this the weirdest 3 years to be a Rangers fan apart from the lower league era?
Yeah, it was quite a bizarre period in time because we didn't, as you alluded to, shoestring budget. You know, I think that's probably underestimating it.
Yeah,
quite frankly, because we really had nothing at all, and even the money we spent, technically, you could say wasn't even our money.
Mm-hmm.
You could go as far as saying we obviously utilised the overdraft, and then we were taking money from the Champions League. It was coming in one hand and it was going out the other. And some of the signings, when you actually think about it, when you really think about it, you know, Ricky Foster, for example, who was obviously a stopgap, and Walter just made it work, which just shows you how much of a genius he was. Domestically, we will obviously go through each season to get 3 in a row with that squad. I mean, I'm not downplaying the quality of the squad. There were still quality players, of course there was, but when you actually look at the circumstances, to get 3 in a row, maybe we didn't do too well in Europe, but to get 3 in a row was just sensational when you look back on it. And I still don't think that history has been as kind to it as it probably should be, because everybody thinks, you know, Rangers, what we do is win. We win leagues and that's it. But under the circumstances, this period, this 3 in a row, this 3 years, this domination, if you will, completely against the odds when you actually kind of look at it closely, which obviously we will do.
Yeah, I mean that's absolutely accurate. I mean, it shows you the genius of Walter Smith, and we'll touch on 2 legacies right at the end of the show in different ways, just how big an impact both men will talk about have. Going into that summer, obviously the summer of 2008, there was a hangover in the support after the unbelievable season previously, but in the background, in the boardroom, it's turning dire. It really is. I mean, the financial world's about to crumble, and as a result, David Murray's world's about to crumble. The debt at this point is 21 million, but Rangers have a record turnover with European competition at this point, and Murray's still saying that we need to tighten our belt. It comes out later, but it's down to obviously players getting bonuses and things like that. But when you're reaching a UEFA Cup final, when you're seeing record turnover, and you get your chairman saying we need to tighten our belt, it shows you just how grim this situation is.
To be fair, David Murray may very well have been saying that we have to tighten our belt and obviously putting the action plan in place, but I don't think that it actually came from Murray.
No, it didn't. No.
Lloyds Bank had a representative on the board. I think his name is Donald Muir.
Yeah, he comes in later. He comes in a year after, I think.
Yeah, so basically Lloyds were calling the shots right from this period right to the end of this period.
Yeah.
And that pretty much, we talk about David Murray. One of David Murray's greatest assets, if you will, wasn't his wealth, it was his ego. And
Mm-hmm.
his ego took a massive dent during this period, because he couldn't be the flamboyant, arrogant owner who will spend more money than Celtic to become to make us the best team in Scotland. We were the best team in Scotland, as I've already said. We were the best team in Scotland purely because of one man, and that was Walter Smith. And it was. I mean, we're going to talk. Obviously, you say the record turnover here and getting into 2008. We did still spend quite a lot of money on this season. Which, to be fair, when we actually look at who we signed and for how much we signed, it probably wasn't the best idea to be doing that. Because, like, for example, Pedro Mendes came in for £3 million, and then a year later we're selling him for half of that. So was that really necessary? You know what I mean? But again, we might never have won the league if it wasn't for Pedro. So
yeah, I mean, and it's that thing as well. Like this transfer window, I think, can get split into two parts, and it starts with obviously the controversial signing of Kenny Miller from Derby. It was condemned with the support of obviously his time at Celtic a couple of seasons before, and he was coming back to Ibrox. And I remember the Kaunas home game, actually, he was booed, and I never understood that, because Miller, it's a tough one, because obviously Miller had been at Celtic and was tapping the badge after scoring against Rangers, but we know Kenny Miller. Kenny Miller goes wherever's best for him, and that's where I kind of sympathise with Kenny Miller. But what was your kind of reaction to that signing at the time?
It was a weird one, because obviously it was about March, whilst we were in that UEFA Cup run. The rumours started kind of coming to the surface that Walter was interested in Miller. Now, when you want to personify a player that fits Walter Smith's system, then Kenny Miller, he ticked every single box. So there was no surprise that obviously Miller was a target. People were talking about, looking at parallels between him and Mo Johnson and stuff. Obviously I wasn't born in that era, but I don't think there'll ever be another Mo Johnson.
No.
It just so happened that Kenny Miller obviously played for Celtic. Where I was struggling with it was when Kenny Miller signed for Celtic, there was definite interest there from Rangers. Obviously, Le Guin coming in, I don't know if that affected it or whatnot, but it obviously was in a Bosman from Wolves to Celtic, and it worked closely with Alan McCoist and Walter with Scotland. So I assumed back then that we were going to sign him. So it was a bit of a gut punch that Celtic obviously stole a march on us, if you will. But for me, it was just kind of, let's just see what happens. His goal scoring record wasn't great. He didn't really start having a rich vein of form when it came to scoring goals until kind of second and third year with Rangers. But I was we needed a new striker. Let's put it that way. Darchville was done. We ran him right into the ground the previous year, and Chris Boyd wasn't going to do what was needed. So, as I said, Muller ticked all the boxes, but the big question mark over him was he played for Celtic. Now, me and you know, we know what the old firm's like when a player's got that crime, if you will, against their name, or that charge. It's, even to this day, there's still some people that have never fully forgiven Kenny Miller. But we're going to come on to the game, which changed my opinion. I was on the side of, nah, this isn't going to work, for two reasons. One, I didn't think it was good enough. How wrong was I? And two, as pathetic as it does sound, he did play for Celtic.
Yeah, and it's that thing as well. Like, imagine a Celtic player going to Rangers now. It's probably worse now because of the way the rivalry is. But it made sense, as you say. Walter knew him. Walter got the absolute best out of him with Scotland, and it was a no-brainer, really, in all honesty. But bringing in Lafferty and Velichka as well, just before we're touching this game, like, the signings, it's definitely obvious the one party wants to strengthen was up front, and Rangers go into the Champions League qualification. Crucial for the club at this point to get the financial kind of situation back on foot. Rangers play Lithuanian champions Kaunas, who were infamously owned by Vladimir Romanov, a name that rings a bell with Rangers fans. A 0-0 draw at Ibrox. Now, this to me was just the same as the season before. It was just boring draws at home, but it's all right. Rangers will do it in away leg. That away leg in Lithuania was disastrous. Rangers go in front with Kevin Thompson, but Kaunas get it back to 2-1, and Kaunas put Rangers out of the Champions League. and Europe is done in the first week of August, considering the fact Rangers had reached a final in May. What a disaster this was.
See, when you think about it, in recent seasons, Malmo, we went into that game and didn't spend any money. You could say there was similarities there. You talk about Lafferty and Velička, that's almost 5 million quid, 3.75 for Lafferty and $1 million for Velička. And it goes back to what I'm saying. I mean, could we have done it without they two? I think we probably could have. And instead of signing them, the obvious one was Stephen Davis. We waited to the very last minute to get Davis in, whereas if we paid the money, what was it, 3 million to get Davis in instead of Lafferty, he's going to be a massive help for Kaunas. So there was a wee bit of mismanagement there from the football side. As you say, you talk about the games, the Ibrox game, I honestly couldn't even tell you one incident that happened in that game.
No, it was just a boring. It was just a The
most frustrating thing for me was in Kaunas, we actually to be so unprofessional, and that's what it was. It definitely wasn't because Kaunas were more talented than us. It was just an unprofessional performance to go 1-0 up and then lose it. I think they scored in the last minute, if I remember. Christian Daly lost his man. Unprofessional, but I think you hit the nail on the head. Hangover from last season. The fans were still scunnered from last season. Obviously, the players were still scunnered, but I think the fans, we've got the right to still feel, pissed off about what happened in the previous season, with the fixture congestion and losing the UEFA Cup final and obviously losing the league. And we had the right to still be feeling, angry about that and sad almost. But the players, they had to be more professional, and they had to see that this was still a massive game, especially with the financial implications. And quite frankly, they just didn't turn up. And to be honest, at that point, I was really, really worried. Not even from the financial implications of not getting into Champions League. So you need to remember, Scott, not only did we not drop in to the UEFA Cup, that was us. We were out.
Yeah, we were totally out.
Yeah. I was worried about the domestic season, but for whatever reason, which I just don't understand, that seemed to make Murray find the money from somewhere to go on a wee splurge to strengthen us for the domestic season.
And this wasn't a new thing with Murray. Murray did this in the past. He did it. I remember going out to Fenerbahce. Remember in 2001, he brings in Ball and Arveladze, like proper like £8 million. Like, why are they not brought in before? Like, you're banking on this money, especially now when you're sitting with nothing. It just makes no sense. It's not good foresight, in my opinion. No,
because at the end of the day, if we bring these players in beforehand, and again I go back to Malmo, if we even spent maybe 4 or 5 million, it's a calculated gamble. If we don't get that Champions League qualification after spending the money for these players to play in these qualifiers, we've still got the chance of getting the Champions League through the league. So there's 2 bites at the cherry. I understand, if you don't get the qualification, you don't need the money is essentially wasted and it's putting us in a more kind of precarious position. But at the end of the day, as you say, Murray still spent the money after the fact anyway. So if he'd done it before the fact, it would have made much more sense and would have gave us a far better chance of actually getting that qualification. Because what this team clearly needed at this point in time was freshness. They've just done a 65 game season, and what was it, 5 weeks later they're straight back at it. And also that summer most of the team were playing international football, so you're talking they had a 2-week break. So freshness was needed, and the players that brought in for that kind of fresh approach was an untested, unproven, inexperienced Kyle Lafferty, and then obviously Velička. But we all know what happened with him. He's just he was essentially a Lithuanian Chris Boyd.
After this, the fans are furious. I think it is that hangover thing as well. But what comes out of that the few days after, I think we all knew that Carlos Cuellar was going to leave. It'd been a revelation the season before. He'd been an absolute amazing piece of business for Rangers. But this is Murray's problem in a nutshell at this period. If David Murray had come out and said at this point, we need Carlos Cuellar's going because we've bought him for $2 million, and we've got a clause that if it goes in the next 12 months, we sell him for $8 million. It's a $6 million profit. It's good business. It's proper good business for him, but he wasn't clear on it, and that's the frustration fans have with Murray. He's talking in riddles at this point, saying that he's allowed it, but the financial situation's not that bad. It doesn't need to happen for financial reasons. What is that all about? What is Murray talk? Why not just say, we've got him for a song, we're selling him for a decent profit? Because that's good business. And I just don't get what he does here.
It's just complete bravado. It's what we know now about Murray. I think at the time we all knew that's what it was like as well, but we allowed it to happen. We almost fed his ego in a way, purely because we were successful on the pitch. Whereas now I think Rangers directors and chairmen, I think they're under a lot more scrutiny now, purely because of what David Murray done. If I remember correctly, I think the narrative coming out of Ibrox regarding Carlos Quella before he was sold was he was going to sign a new contract. And that's all the talk, that we got as fans. And the next thing you know, we're blindsided because he's off and he's got this clause in his contract that, as you say, we're told after the fact. And make no mistake about it, man, Carlos Quella is an amazing piece of business, but what a loss that was, because he was just sensational in that one season he spent with Rangers. But as you say, you can't, even if he didn't have that clause, even if it was just an offer from Aston Villa for £8 million for a player we signed for £2 million in a £6 million profit in a 12-month period, it's still fantastic business. But at this point, we're out against Kaunas. We've got Davy Weir, Christian Daly, and Kirk Broadfoot as our options at centre half. The league's fast approaching, and it's not looking good at all. And the fans are kind of like, what's going on here? But luckily, we get a replacement. I think we're more than lucky with the replacement we got, because Bagheera, if you remember, he wasn't the number one target. It was Glenn Loovens.
Yeah, that's right.
Can you imagine if it was Loovens we got instead of Bagheera? You know what I mean? Then we would have been knackered.
And as you say, it gets this wee splurge going with Bagheera coming in, Mendes, Davis, brings in Edu, Aaron from Valencia, remember him? But why, as you say, why is that not done? Why are they not done that once before and give yourself a proper chance at this money? But despite all that, Rangers do start the domestic season well. They win 6 of their first 7 games. The highlight of that was obviously that 4-2 win at Parkhead. Miller scoring a double, Mendes with that terrific goal. But it was the last game as well for Daniel Kuzan, who played his last game before joining Hull the following day. And did he leave in a high?
Yeah, he did. But again, I'm obviously, hindsight, I'm totally delighted that he stayed and he played in that game. Took everybody by surprise that he was named in the team sheet. But again, you have to question Rangers' strategy. Sorry, easy for me to say strategy here, because Kuzan basically told us in January that he wanted to go, and the only reason he couldn't go in January was because he played for 3 clubs if he signed for a new club. So we knew he wanted to go. Why did we wait to the last day of the transfer window to actually sell him? Especially when you consider the players we brought in: Kenny Muller, Velichka, Lafferty. That's 3 strikers.
It's almost like you're preparing for someone to go into it.
Yeah, he should have been away long before then. We should have had that money in. But as I say, the facts are he did stay to the last day of the window. He did play his last game against Celtic, came right out for the cold, came from nowhere. I think everybody who's seen the team sheet that day were like, what the hell's going on here?
Yeah.
And he went out with a bang. Like, to get an assist, a goal and a red card in your final game against Celtic, there is no better way of getting out. And that's what you got with Daniel Kuzan. If Rangers were playing Motherwell that day at Fir Park and Kuzan was played, Kuzan would have touched the ball about 4 times and that's it. And he couldn't have been bothered against the small teams, but when it came to the big teams, he was a big game player and he was fantastic that day. And it was probably one of the best centre-half performances I've ever seen in an Old Firm match.
Yeah, it was. He was unplayable that day, and as you say, it was that hot and cold thing. If he was up for it, Daniel Kuzan was unplayable, but if he wasn't up for it, then he was a man down, and that's Daniel Kuzan in a nutshell. But Miller obviously scores a double. I think Miller this cements him as in the good books again, and he's terrific. I think he's terrific that day as well. He's finished for the second goal. His first goal is really good, and then obviously Mendes does it with that amazing strike. That was a massive win, going to Celtic Park and winning 4-2.
And in many ways, it was unexpected as well. We started the season well, but Celtic also started the season well. Our record at Parkhead wasn't great. We got the win, the against Celtic when Walter came back. Ugo Egill scored. But after that, we hadn't beaten them. Obviously, we got beat twice at Parkhead in the space of like 11 days, getting into the title run in the previous year. So if we were going to win, if you were going to ask me before that match if we were going to win, I would say it would be tight. But by God, we absolutely smashed them, and 4-2 is very flattering. Remember, they got a goal in the very last minute, like the worst wall you'll ever see from a Rangers team when they're obviously defending a free kick, but it had holes all over the place, and Nakamura just picked his spot. And I felt really, you seen the reaction of Alan McGregor when Nakamura scored that goal. The game's over, you know what I mean? It's 4-2 and McGregor's getting off his seat, and that's purely because it flattered them. That should have been 5 or 6 that day. We absolutely smashed them, and the performance really did come out of nowhere, because I did expect a typical Walter Smith Celtic Parkhead performance, sitting in, soaking up the pressure, getting them on the counter attack. There was none of that. We just went for the throat. And as you say, Kenny Miller's goal, the finish for that first goal was just absolutely unbelievable. And to be honest with you, and I will be honest here, when he got the 2 goals, that was it for me. I'd accepted him back in, because I just thought it was brilliant. And you will remember, hopefully, the banner that the Celtic fans, I think it was the Green Brigade, that had out. It was Kenny from South Park, and they said, "Oh my God, they've signed Kenny." And yeah, we never seen that.
I don't remember that.
No, yeah. Oh my God, they signed Kenny, and then it was Kenny for South Park. Yeah, with Kenny inside it, and yeah, I think that banner was retired indefinitely after that.
Yeah, I don't think you'll ever have seen that again. But that win was obviously massive for Rangers and domestic. It's only domestic fronts Rangers are playing in. Celtic are obviously in the Champions League, but going into the next Old Firm game on the 27th of December, Celtic are 4 points clear. McDonald scores that volley, and it's 7 points, and Celtic win 1-0 at Ibrox going into 2009. That was just a bad day, wasn't it? That was just Rangers get absolutely nothing going at all that day.
If we played the way we played at Parkhead, we would have won that day. Celtic were in disarray. They started with Koki Mizuno, if you remember, because they suspended Aidan McGeady. Like, they actually suspended him for
that's right,
like a breach of discipline or something. 2 weeks out. They had injuries. Basically, getting into that match, we were heavy favourites. We had basically a full-strength team. I think Bugera or Weir, one of the two, they were actually injured or suspended. So Kurt Broadfoot started at centre-half, and it was his fault that McDonald got that goal.
Yeah.
That was just pitiful. A pathetic performance, to be honest with you. And yeah, I mean, you know me. You see me on Twitter. Like, I'm very reactionary. I'd conceded the title at this point. I just didn't see how we could close a 7-point gap, albeit with a game in hand. Celtic had the momentum. Celtic were going for 4 in a row, if you remember. They had the experience, the know-how. And see, to be honest with you, Scott, the biggest thing that happened to us that really helped us this year is the Celtic board actually made a massive cock-up, because they refused to sign Steven Fletcher. If they got Steven Fletcher over the line, I think it would have been curtains for Rangers, to be honest. Because, again, Celtic's record at Ibrox was shocking. I can't remember the last victory before that win, but
it was under McLeish, I think, because it didn't win under Le Guin.
Yeah, I think it was under McLeish. And yeah, they came here with half a squad, playing this unknown Japanese 20-year-old who done absolutely nothing in the game and nothing after the game. And yeah, they walked away with a win, and it was the only word I can really use to describe it was pathetic. I have no idea, after performing the way we did at Parkhead and showing that if you attacked a Celtic team, they were very vulnerable. You know, McManus, Colwell, Mark Wilson at the back. And yet we decided to play as if we were the away team. Don't get it. And yeah, at this point, I'm really worried. I'm really worried about, obviously not winning the league, but I'm really worried about Walter's future here, because I'm thinking Walter's legacy is at stake.
Yeah, I think that's fair as well. When Walter gets told in the January, I think by the bank, that you need to cut costs, he had to. The likes of Chris Burke and Jean-Claude Dartsville had been told to leave in free transfers, but the main story of that January was the saga regarding Chris Boyd going to Birmingham. Now, Chris Boyd didn't want to go, made it perfectly clear, refused personal terms. Murray, again, with this nonsense statement, if you remember, there's something along the lines of, we don't have to sell Boyd, but if we don't sell him, then there's problems. Now, I'm not a psychologist or anything like that, but what is that all about? What is he talking about there? You either need to sell him or you don't.
again, it just comes down to bravado. Murray never ever liked to have any heat on him. He didn't like to admit that there was a problem. We could all see that there was a problem. We could all almost sense that there was an issue. Thank God for Walter Smith, really, because he was a very honest, dignified man, and Walter told us the truth all throughout this whole saga.
Yeah.
But yet his chairman is coming out with just bluster and rubbish, and no one wanted Chris Boyd to go from a fan's perspective.
How important was Boyd at this point? Boyd's the reason it's 7 points. Really, Boyd's keeping Rangers going in the league.
Yeah, it's I think football fans nowadays we're more educated in terms of we know what players are expected to do within a system. But back then, all we knew was Chris Boyd was ineffective for 85 minutes of a match, but the 5 minutes in that match, he's probably scored 3-4 goals.
Yeah.
And that's genuinely not an exaggeration. So Chris Boyd was adored by the Rangers fans. And the fact that he was potentially going to Birmingham for, 3.5 million?
Yeah, I think it was just under 4, I think, yeah.
You could not understand why it was probably being sold for less than what we felt it was worth. But really, when you actually look at it now, nearly 4 million quid for Chris Boyd is actually pretty good, because we showed, especially in the seasons after, I think next season was his last season, but the third season, life goes on without Chris Boyd, and we were totally fine. So it was just trying to get that kind of balance, I think, in terms of the finances and the playing and on the playing field. But no matter what, football fans are emotional. No matter what, that deal had to happen, and Boyd refused for whatever reason, which is his right. And by the way, anybody who says they were annoyed at Chris Boyd for refusing is a liar, because I think we were all relieved. But as you said, Murray's spin on it was just ridiculous. We don't have to sell him, but if we don't sell him, there's problems. Like, what one is it? It's such a contradictory, oxymoronic thing to say. And
it's still it's that thing as well. I think is it that thing, like, you've got a media who don't challenge him. At this point, he's not as close with the media. I think they've saw through his bravado, but he's still in that thing of he can, in his own head, in his own ego, he can spin whatever line he wants, and he doesn't get challenged. This is I think this is what.
I don't think it's so much that he's not challenged. The thing with Murray was he sold newspapers because he gave fantastic headlines. And if you annoyed Murray, he didn't give you any headlines. And that's what it was. So, yeah, in a way, yeah, that is probably why they didn't challenge him. But it was far too cosy with the media, because, as I said, he sold, thousands and thousands and thousands of newspapers purely because of the rubbish that he spouted. And, journalists had to box clever with that. They know, like, journalists aren't stupid. They know that Murray coming out with something like that is just ridiculous. But if they say anything bad about it, Murray won't talk to them. And that's going to affect their business. Whereas Rangers fans, we could start to see at this point, like, what is he talking about? And we could tell that kind of power that Murray had over Rangers and Scottish football to a certain extent, he, loosened his grip on that, not by choice, but because he was forced to. He was no longer the powerful businessman who had all this money and was a chairman of Rangers and could do this and that, and the tenner for every fiver thing was long gone. That's the kind of guy that David Murray was. He knows he's made outlandish statements like the tenner for every fiver, the moonbeams, and none of it came to fruition. And Rangers fans were starting to realise, you're just full of shit, mate. And this is... He tried to keep the fans on side, but also try to give us a thinly veiled message. But we could all see through it at this point, and that's what worried him, because he didn't want to look like an idiot. And to be quite frankly, he might not have looked like a complete idiot at the time, but as it transpired, as the years went on, he became more than the villain.
Yeah, and Boyd obviously stays, and Rangers pick up in the league. January and February, they win 5 games and draw 2, and they're levelling points with Celtic heading into March. But March is not a good month, if you remember. Losing at home to Inverness, a draw with Hearts. But the League Cup final against Celtic, that capped off this disastrous month. Rangers were 3 points behind, but losing that first trophy, and it was the most boring Old Firm Cup final I've ever seen. and Celtic just won it in extra time. There was just nothing in this game at all, and it was just kept rounded off this appalling month.
Yeah, it could have went either way, that game, to be honest. Neither team really deserved to win it.
No.
Obviously, when you look at the facts, Celtic did eventually score 2 goals. I think the first goal was Darren O'Day, and then the last goal was a last-minute penalty. So
yeah, McGeady.
Yeah, they scored 2 goals, so they deserve to win the cup final. That's the facts of the matter. But beforehand, it really could have went either way. As you say, it was boring. There was no needle in it. It was just sort of. I'm not really sure what either team's approach. I think both teams were scared of both teams, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
But as you said, it just capped off quite a bad month. And yeah, we still had the Scottish Cup to go, but we just had to put full focus into the league. But obviously there was another setback to come.
There was that, and can I switch gears a wee bit just to talk about an off-field incident that took place around about this time as well. Barry Ferguson and Alan McGregor on Scotland duty, and obviously the incident with drinking in Loch Lomond. Walter Smith had phoned the pair and told them to keep their head down, but as you remember, Ferguson and McGregor make it worse on the bench in the game against Iceland. Murray, right, McGregor doesn't kick a ball again this season, right? McGregor, I think a lot of people think McGregor's finished as well, but Murray's he's not the dynamic chairman he was back in the 90s, but this is Murray as dynamic. Murray tells Ferguson after the Le Guin incident that if you mess up again, your Rangers career's over, and he follows through on that because Ferguson didn't think that Murray would follow through. Why is Murray doing it with this? This is purely, in my opinion, Murray. You're wrong in David Murray. You're not wrong in anybody else. Is that fair to say?
I think there's some substance to it, but I think if Walter Smith wanted to keep Barry Ferguson, David Murray would have allowed it. I think it was more to do with the fact that Walter had enough. You don't cross Walter, and I believe that Barry did quite a few times, and he was on his very last warning, both from Murray and Walter. And at the end of the day, when you're the Rangers captain, you need to handle yourself in a certain way. And essentially what Barry Ferguson did was embarrass the club, embarrassed himself, embarrassed his manager, and they brought down a younger teammate. McGregor, to that point, he had some headlines in the news, but as his private life, that kind of stuff happens. But in terms of his behaviour on and off the park, it was exemplary, you know what I mean? And yet there's Barry Ferguson, the captain of Rangers, leading him down some sort of path that just really beggars belief. As I say, I'll say it again, he was a captain of Rangers. He should have been leading by example. And then what's also forgotten, is he was a captain of Scotland. There's no way. I mean, I'm no George Burley fan or Stephen Presley fan. I know they two were involved in this, right? And they didn't exactly handle themselves well at all either. But there's no way Barry Ferguson, captain of Scotland, captain of Rangers, should be drinking till all hours in the morning.
No.
And making an arse of himself, really. And then the incident itself, first of all, they shouldn't have had the opportunity to do that. They shouldn't have been on the bench because they never played for Scotland again. Obviously, McGregor did, but as far as the SFA were concerned, they were done. So why were they on the bench?
It makes no sense.
If you're going to put 2 players on the bench and you have absolutely no intention of playing them, what's the reason there? There was a third. David Marshall was in that squad. And there were other midfielders in that squad. What would have happened if Craig Gordon got an injury in that game? McGregor has to come on, and then 3 days later he's suspended for life. So there is some fault there from the management and SFA, but all the blame has to lie. The majority of the blame has to lie on the door of Barry Ferguson and Alan McGregor. I thought the treatment of McGregor from Rangers was very harsh. I think he should have had a slap in the wrist. This was his first sort of misdemeanor, if you will. And it's even you actually think about it, Scott, he's played another 10 years with Rangers combined. Not another incident. They can an utter professional. Whereas Ferguson up to this point, how many incidents had that been up to this point? You're talking maybe
well,
7, 8, 9.
The Le Guin one was the kind of final slap in the wrist. Like
we all forgave him for that. We gave him the benefit of the doubt for that.
Yeah.
When you're going to cross Walter and you're going to disregard what Walter says to you, I'm sorry, but as much as I love Barry Ferguson, even I was done with him at this point.
Yeah, I think that's fair. But Rangers, after that incident, Rangers continue to they turn it round in April. 4 straight wins to cut the gap to a point, and they booked their place in the Scottish Cup final where they would play Falkirk. The win over Hearts in the beginning of May meant the final Old Firm game was going to be pivotal at Ibrox, and Stephen Davis scores that goal just at the end of the first half, and they moved 2 points clear of Celtic. That was a massive game. That was a massive victory. Would you not agree?
Yeah, it was huge, absolutely huge. I mean, we'd obviously we'd closed the gap and overturned the gap into our favour. There was still another, obviously, wee twist and turn to come, but yeah, that game, it just felt huge. When you kind of knew that the first team to score were going to go and win it because it was that edgy, it was that tight. And luckily for us, Stephen Davis got it. Kenny Muller set the goal up as well. And yeah, you just expect that we'll get the job done. And that'll be it, first league title in 4 years. But as I said, there was another few twists and turns to come. But that game itself, that was probably the biggest Old Firm game in a long, long time. And on the perspective of a Rangers fan and a Celtic fan, because a lot was riding on it. Celtic had romped the last couple of leagues. And this was so tight, you couldn't split both teams. And Celtic only needed a point that day. A point would have far more benefits to Celtic than it would Rangers. And we managed to get the win. And again, you talk about dullness. The game, for a league title deciding Old Firm game, it didn't have many talking points as such. But at the end of the day, we got the job done. We got the win, and we're all delighted.
Yeah, I mean, it was one of those games that it was the goal happened and not much else happened. But as you say, it was a bit of a swing from then on up until the final day. Hibs played a part. The Rangers got a draw away to Hibs, and it gave Celtic the initiative and goal difference. But Celtic would slip up at Easter Road as well.
Yeah.
And it would mean it would go into this final day. All Rangers had to do was win and go to Tannadice, and win the game. And that's exactly what they got. Kyle Lafferty gives Rangers the best possible start. Mendes makes it 2-0 just before half-time, and Boyd rounds it off as Rangers would win 3-0 and wrestle the title back from Celtic on their first time in 4 years. What's your memories of that day?
My memories of that day getting into that game was I wasn't very confident, because if you remember, our record at Tannadice was shocking.
Yeah.
And I fully expected a slip up. I really did. Purely because of our record. And let's be honest, this Rangers team had not really shown bottle as such. Yeah, you can look at the Old Firm game with Davis scoring, that has shown bottle to a certain degree, but they would then drop the points to Hibs, and we rely on a favour from Hibs to then do the business against Celtic, which luckily we get. And I'm thinking to myself, going into this game, like, this is, I really just don't think that we have the bottle to do this. And Dundee United seem to have had our number, especially at Tannadice. But, an early goal settled everything down by a player who, let's be honest, Scott shouldn't even have been playing in that game, because remember the week before he dived.
Yeah.
Charlie Mulgrew, assaulted him. It was disgusting. But then when Pedro Mendes gets that goal, just in the stroke of half time, I knew we'd win. We'd win. Don't get me wrong, even at 3-0, man, I'm still edgy. I'm still shouting calling to get the ball clear, but we've seen it out, and champions, and it was just euphoric, really, because when you think about it, the 7-point gap in January, and then we're our own worst enemy at times, especially that period in March, and it was just like, are we ever going to win this league again, kind of thing? Because this is a decent team we've got. It's certainly better than the Le Guen and McLeish teams, but we got the job done, and that's all that mattered in the end. And yeah, I was absolutely delighted, to be honest with you.
Yeah, absolutely as well. And they would win that league memorably in that day, and then go and complete the double. A natural novel goal against Falkirk would clinch the Scottish Cup and the League Cup double in the 08-09. But moving into that summer, the garden should have been rosy, but it was far from it, because the off-field situation now is becoming even worse. Lloyds had took over H-Boss, and David Murray's empire is no longer his. The bank have got him with the short and curlies. And in August of 2009, Murray steps down as chairman again. He'd done it before and kind of lied to why, but he'd kind of achieved everything, but this was mainly to find a buyer. Alistair Johnson had been promoted from director to chairman. He'd experience as an accountant with American companies. He was clearly in to get a buyer. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, it was. He was more of a kind of stewardship, just overlooking everything and making sure that the company, if you will, was in the best possible shape for someone to buy. I mean, Alistair Johnson is back on the board now, and what we know about Alistair Johnson is he's a massive Rangers fan, and he tried his best to avoid the Craig Whyte situation, which shows, by the way, I know we're not here to talk about Craig Whyte, but it shows that Johnson didn't really have any power at all.
No, he didn't. He absolutely didn't.
You say there that he was there to get a buyer. He was there to make sure that, everything was running smoothly for David Murray to bring a buyer in.
Yeah.
Which is just ridiculous. But, good guy, as I say, still on the board now. I trust him completely. And he done his best. At the end of the day, he's a Rangers fan, and he can basically tell his grandchildren, like, I was a chairman of Rangers once, and he done a decent job. You know what I mean? We're going to talk about a season, Scott, where we get 2 in a row. He was a chairman for that, and he overseen that without spending a penny. So that's an achievement in itself.
Yeah, and you talk about the not spending a penny. Rangers only make one signing, and it's a loan that summer. Jerome Rotan from PSG, not anywhere near the player he was in his time at Monaco, but it was this whole season, right? We'll can I mention this season just as a winner? Rangers are very, very good considering that the shoestring budget they've got. They win the league, pivotal wins against Celtic, who just couldn't get anything going under Tony Mowbray. But how big an achievement is this for Smith to win this championship, considering what the hand he was dealt, shall we say?
Yeah, it's a massive achievement. It'll go down as one of the great Rangers title victories when you consider the circumstances. And the circumstances where, look, Celtic got a Premier League manager, albeit he got them relegated. I was surprised Strachan stepped down, to be honest, and slightly surprised that they went with Mowbray, but I can see why. Although they got West Brom relegated, they also got West Brom up. Then you look at the job he done with Hibs, and you've seen the type of football we like to play, and I thought, right, this is a bit of a challenge, and they backed him. You know what I mean? They backed Mowbray to a certain extent. I think 5 or 6 new signings, good bit of money spent, and I was thinking, right, okay, we need to get off to a good start here, and we need to hope that Celtic have some sort of teething issues, and they did. But I fully expected Celtic to come good at some point, and we just had to put the momentum on. And Celtic's, let's just call it, they absolutely imploded. That obviously helped us a bit, but even without that implosion, I still think we would have won the league because we were that consistent, we were that good. It wasn't pretty at times, but there's a spell in this season between November and December where Rangers just blew teams away every week. I think we scored something like 24 goals in the space of 4 or 5 matches. So we did play good football, but when we needed to grind it out, we did grind it out. And the crucial part here was we took care of O'Firniams. You know what I mean? That was it. And as we say, all of it spending a penny. We brought Roten in, just a complete. It was a signing for the signing's sake. You know what I mean? I just don't understand it. It was completely. If we'd signed Jerome Roten, 3, 4, 5 years previous, it would have been a great signing. Let's be honest. But the guy was done. I'm pretty sure that if Walter was given the budget to at least bring a player in, the budget he was given for Roten, I'm pretty sure he could have found somebody within the Scottish League that would actually have done as a ton more than Roten. But it makes it all the more remarkable because as we discussed, like no new signings, quite a few departures as well, and yet we still managed to win the league. Yeah, I mean, you see the squads now at the bare bones, and getting into Europe, Rangers were drawn against Seville, Stuttgart, and Unarea Urziceni. A decent draw on paper, but it was just a disaster, wasn't it? It was just so many. But the 4-1 defeat against Unarea and Urziceni. Do you have a wee funny story about that? I was doing the star ball for that game. The star ball? Yeah, see, remember the Champions League, the flag in the middle, the centre circle? I'd done the star ball for that game. Jesus
Went
Christ.
off the park, Rangers were 1-0 in front, went to my seat and it was 1 each. And it would just get downhill from there. But
if you remember though, we started that, group campaign remarkably well. That goal by Bergera and Stuttgart.
Yeah, in Stuttgart, yeah.
Get a point in Germany is not an easy feat, you know what I mean? And we get that point, and then the next game's against United, and you think to yourself, this is a chance of getting 4 points out of 6 here. This will be a brilliant start. And to be honest, we see that United game, that was utterly pathetic from Rangers. Do I blame Walter? Not really, because I think the team that he put out should have been more than good enough to beat United. It was just a complete. I don't even know. I can never really understand. I could never really understand why it was so bad, but they just collapsed, and they really were not a good team at all. Without getting too Jackie McNamara on you, they really weren't. We'd shown that when we went over to Romania. They obviously got that late goal for the draw in 1 each, but they were not a good team. Stuttgart weren't a great team. Don't get me wrong, Seville were a brilliant team.
Seville were outstanding that game.
You have to say, man, like that is, if we get to the Champions League this season and we get a group like that this season, I'm commanding the last 16. And it was a real opportunity to miss for Rangers. It really, really was. How we managed to be so bad to get 2 points. All we got was 2 points in that group stage. It was proper going back to Walter's first spell, really, where he did look naive in Europe. But as I say, there is some blame attached to Walter, but I blame the players more. It was just, I really couldn't understand why they were performing so poorly. And let's just call it for what it is. Like, I could probably accept the 4-1 against Seville, but United, man, it was embarrassing.
It was, and it was just a bad European run, and especially you're coming from 2 years before Rangers are going to UEFA Cup finals, and just since it was absolutely shambolic. But October, a home draw against Hibs, and this is where I think it hits rock bottom. Like this is where I think a lot of people, even the most passionate David Murray defender, had to go, wait a minute here, something's happening. Walter Smith comes out in his post-match interview and basically says the bank's running the club. Lloyd had obviously took over from H-Boss. Donald Buer, you mentioned earlier, he'd come in to get a grip of this debt and basically just get it under control. And Lloyd's wanted Murray solvent to find a buyer and get Rangers off his hands, because they had so much riding in David Murray. When a bank goes into a football club, there's only ever one outcome. That this is grim, it's grave, and it just shows you and you say just Walter Smith coming out and being honest and saying the bank's running the club here. I'm shoehorned.
The thing is, we talk about the bravado for David Murray, and we talk about him wanting to be the hero and the big man and stuff. The clever thing here, really, to protect his legacy, would have been to sell every single asset we had. I'm talking, I can't remember if Steven Naismith get injured. I don't think he did. I think Naismith was all right. Did he get injured this season?
I think it was a season before, I think.
Yeah. So Naismith's an asset. Boyd, he's still an asset. Bergera, Papic to a certain extent. Edu, Alan McGregor, probably the biggest asset we've got. You could have get 7, 8, 9, 10 million for him. Every single asset that Rangers had should have been sold, and the bank should have been repaid, and Rangers should have been protected for eternity after that. Because you fast forward 24 months from this period, all these assets walk out the door and we don't get a penny for them.
Correct.
And what should have happened was Murray should have said, right, we need to sell all these players, we need to get this bank off our back, and we're going to go through some tough times in the next year or two, but we're doing it to preserve the Rangers kind of legacy and to avoid any embarrassment. Instead, they went the opposite way, where he embarrassed the Rangers support for the next 4 or 5 years. Even after he left, for the next 4 or 5 years, it was the worst time ever to be a Rangers fan. And that purely became a fact because of his mismanagement. When the bank were that much on him, we should have took our medicine and just went through maybe 1 or 2 years of a drought, we're still in the Premier League, we're still, going to be competing to get into Europe. We might pick up a trophy or two, and you never know, we might actually win a league, but at least it's no Division 3, League 1 and Championship, and at least we don't have to have fans from other teams saying that we're a new club and all that. He absolutely ruined his legacy when, for me, the answer was sitting right in front of him. You've got a lot of assets there that you could probably command 15 to 20 million pounds for. Getting them out the door. Yeah, we'll not win the league. Yeah, we're handing the league to Celtic, but at the end of the day, the consequences are not doing that. We all know what happened, and why he never looked at that as a viable option was purely for his own selfish needs, to be the chairman of Rangers or the owner of Rangers, who are going for 2 in a row, and look what I've achieved without spending any money, when we should have been more savvy.
And around about this time, there's talk in the press about a couple of potential buyers. Graham Duffy was the first one. Do you remember him?
I don't remember Graham Duffy,
but he was he was perceived as this kind of tycoon for America. He was going to come in. His big plan was raising 50 million through a membership scheme. He was going to buy the club and service the debt. The problem was, though, you looked into his background, his contacts were worse than what was to come. Let's say, and he was already bankrupt, and it was just he didn't have the resources. He was a pie in the sky name, but one name that does come up, and he plays a bit of a part in the eventual sale, Andrew Ellis.
Yeah, I remember him. Yeah, the first thing you seen with Andrew Ellis was he was a chairman or owner of Northampton Town. Yeah. And you're just thinking, this isn't it. Without even looking at his financial or his business background or what his finances are, you just know, like, when you hear that the ex-owner of Northampton Town is considering buying Rangers, you're like, nah, this isn't it. And again, I don't want to call him a con man, because I think when you look at all the con mans at Ibrox, I think he's probably low on the list, but certainly a cancer. And how he was even given the opportunity to do due diligence on Rangers, when quite clearly he didn't have the resources to be the Rangers owner or chairman or whatever you want to call it. That's how desperate Murray was.
Aye, and it's that simple. Murray was desperate, and he would have. He sells the club to a complete charlatan. But this is Murray for me, right? Murray, his big thing we spoke about in the last show was, I'll sell to the person with the best interest in the club at heart. Murray's not interested in that anymore. Not was he ever, but again, he's saying that just to preserve himself. But I mean, look at the names that are linked with Rangers at this point: Graham Duffy, Andrew Ellis. That shows you not only how grim the situation is, but also, like, if Murray had took the club to market 10 years before, you'd probably be getting like unbelievable amount of people kind of lining up asking how much it's worth.
I think the issue with David Murray also was, Dave King, Douglas Park, John Bennett, all the rest of the kind of well-known guys that have been involved in Rangers in the last couple of years. They didn't just become Rangers fans in the last couple of years. They were Rangers fans throughout all their life. And you try to tell me they weren't interested at this period of time? Of course they were. Murray didn't want to sell to them.
Do you think they had the resources though to do that?
I think they had the resources, and I think they had the willingness to do it. It was just purely because Murray did not want to sell to them. When Murray said that he wanted to sell to the right people, that was somebody that didn't know Rangers and wouldn't expose him. Yeah. Murray was trying to protect his legacy, because Murray knew that if Dave King get the keys to Rangers or Douglas Park get the keys to Rangers at this period in time, they were going to find all sorts, and they were going to find the truth, and that would have ruined his legacy. But the ironic thing was, he ruined his legacy anyway because of what he'd done. And I believe David Murray when he says that he genuinely was doing the right thing for Rangers. Like, he thought he was doing the right thing for Rangers. He just didn't realise how bad it actually was to become. I think he always knew administration was possible, but he didn't want to be the one to pull the trigger on that.
No.
See if Dave King and Douglas Park came in and then stuck us in administration for a couple of months and then brought us back out, that is probably what needed to happen.
Yeah.
And David Murray just didn't want to be associated with that, because then he knew that if that's what was going to happen, who's Dave King and Douglas Park going to blame for that? It's going to be David Murray. Who did Craig Whyte blame? Craig Whyte didn't put any blame on David Murray's door at all.
No.
As far as we were concerned, how many people were raging at David Murray when that happened, when the initial administration happened? Very few. It wasn't until the things started coming out that we thought, all right, Murray's done us here.
Mm-hmm.
And that's exactly what Murray was doing. He was protecting his own legacy, but trying to spin it as protecting Rangers, which, to be fair, I think he was trying to, but he was far more concerned about his own reputation. And it's really, really, it's this ego drive that he was on.
Yeah, and it's ego dominates your decision making, and that's the big difference for me between Murray and the people we'll talk about in the next episodes who had no interest in preserving anything. Murray wasn't an evil guy. He wasn't. What he was, his problem was, in my opinion, he just gambled too much and didn't admit. He couldn't bring himself to admit that he got it wrong.
No, he would never do it.
Never do it, and he still hasn't. Still hasn't to this day. And if you asked him now, if he come on here and you asked him about it, he would give you some bullshit story.
He would blame, as he's always done, he would blame Craig Whyte, who is no innocent party in this, let me tell you.
No, he isn't. But he wouldn't just blame Craig Whyte. He would blame like other things. He would blame the financial crisis that he certainly played a part in. He would blame the things before that, the Twin Towers thing. That everything he could blame, he would blame it on that. He wouldn't put it on, I have totally mismanaged the last few years of my time at that club.
At the end of the day, the facts are the facts. Every penny David Murray spent as Rangers chairman wasn't his own money.
Correct, and that was, we said that back at the beginning. It wasn't about making money. It was a hobby for him.
Yeah, and this is a guy that signed off on a £12 million striker who was a flop. He signed off on a £6 million left back, Michael Ball, who I don't want to call Ball a flop, but he came with a serious injury which affected his time at Rangers.
Yeah. Daniel Prodan.
Yeah, I was about to say £2.5 million for a remaining centre half that never played.
Jasper Christensen.
Yeah, and
the names are endless. Like
he put us on the road to destruction, and he will never admit to doing it, because his excuse will always be the Rangers fans loved it, the Rangers fans demanded it. You weren't moaning at the time. We weren't moaning at the time because we weren't told the truth. If we'd known the truth that this, £12 million purchase of Tory Andrew Fo is going to have serious consequences farther down the line, we're going to be like, no, just don't do it. Like, no, we're fine. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And his inability to be completely honest with Rangers fans was his biggest downfall. And that's how, when you look at Dave King never lied to Rangers fans. He told us how it was, you know what I mean? He was probably too honest, but at the end of the day, that's what we needed to hear. I mean, we look at, obviously, next episode you'll talk about all the charlatans that came into Rangers board on, like Charles Green and Malcolm Murray and all the rest of them, and Mike Ashley. These are guys that can't even look you in the face, and we had that after the worst period in our history. And it goes back to what I'm saying. That is why Murray did not want the club going in the hands of the likes of Dave King and Park, because he knew that they would have told the truth, and the truth would have looked really bad in him. But yet, Rangers would have been okay. We would have come out of it fine. We wouldn't have had to play 3-4 years in the lower divisions. But Murray obviously didn't mind that too much, because his legacy was almost intact, but it's not intact anymore, because we all seen it. Yeah,
we've all seen it, and that's absolutely fair to say. And back on the pitch, Rangers Smith had worked wonders to win that league that season, and obviously that St Mirren final, the character of that team to win that game, 9 men, Kenny Miller with that late header, but that whole season, getting that league over the line and things like that, like, how much does that speak to Walter Smith?
Well, for me, like, it's so easy to kind of, look at the 9-man cup final. It's so easy to look at the Morris Edu last minute goal. It's so easy to look at all the kind of grinding out the results and getting things over the line. But if you want to epitomise just how much that Rangers team fought for each other, fought for Walter Smith, go to Parkhead. Scott McDonald scores in the 79th minute. Later, we get that goal. See the team that day, you remember, we were absolutely on the bare bones. We had the injuries and suspensions. We were on our arse, you know what I mean? Chris Boyd played 90 minutes that day because we had no other striker. Danny Wilson played centre-half with Davy Weir. We were absolutely... We had no right whatsoever to get anything out of that game. Celtic battered us that day, and yet we came out with a draw. And that's what it was all about with Walter and this team. Fought for each other, stood up to the challenge, and they'd done it for the badge in the front of the jersey. And that's all we ever ask for as Rangers fans. We don't ask for much, really, when you think about it. We don't ask for silky, free-flowing football. Just win at all costs. And see, if you don't win, have no regrets when you come off that park. Give absolutely 110%. And that's what this team did. And that's why we could... I feel that there was such a close bond between this Rangers team and the fans at the time, because we really got them that this was a hard-working bunch of players. Maybe technically they weren't the best, but do you know what? Hard work. I think Gary Neville said it the other day there. Hard work beats talent when talent doesn't work hard. And that's exactly what this Rangers team were.
Yeah, absolutely. And getting into that summer of 2010, Walter Smith, he had a few million to make some signings, but he had to... Was it quality or was it quantity? And he did go for quality. I mean, I'm going to say James Beattie next, but James Beattie was the first signing of that summer. £2 million from Stoke, experienced Premier League player, but he was just not James Beattie anymore. But Nikica Jelavic was the big signing of that summer, £4 million. That was the biggest spend Rangers had in one player since 2005. That was, I mean, when you look back, like how was that possible?
Yeah, I don't really understand it. I think obviously getting the automatic Champions League place.
Yeah, I think that's the only way that happens. Yeah,
I think we mortgaged some of that. Ring fence some of that, if you will. It was a total surprise. And then, as you say, the thing that really confused me was, right, so we've got a wee bit of money here. We're really getting no players at all. If injuries and suspensions kick in, surely we should spread that money out in 3-4 players. But instead, we seem to just want to focus on the one player. So, like, I'll be a liar if I says to you, I thought Jelavic was going to be a brilliant signing. I didn't know much about him, but what really excited me was the fact that Walter was so, had his heart set on it. There was only one guy he wanted, and that was Jelavic, and it was a saga. Let's be honest. Rapid Vienna just wanted to play ball with. They didn't want to sell him, and then bids were getting rejected, and Jelavic had to force to move through. And you think to yourself, if Walter's so hell-bent on getting this guy in when we really need bodies rather than quality, this guy must have something about him. Yeah. And to eventually get that over the line, you're like, right, okay, let's see what you've got. And how many players come in to Rangers, just specifically Rangers? I think Celtic have got a better track record than us when it comes to this kind of thing. But how many players do you see coming into Rangers and hit the ground running? Not many.
Not many at all.
It takes them a few months sometimes. Look at John Lundstrom, it took him 6 months, but Big Jelavic, man, just came in, hit the ground running. Obviously got a really nasty injury, but he picked up from where he left off when he came back for his injury, and that just showed you that this guy was absolute quality, and it just shows you that Walter Smith's judgment was completely spot on yet again.
And he got it spot on the early start of this season. 9 games, first 9 league games, Rangers win. They won 3-1 against Celtic at Parkhead in the first Old Firm game. They're 1 point clear of Celtic at the end of October after that draw at Inverness. But they start the Champions League campaign well. I mean, an infamous Walter Smith masterclass at Old Trafford to hold Man United to a 0-0 draw, beat Bursaspor in the first game, and then the third game against Valencia. How Rangers don't win that game, I don't know. But, I mean, the start of that season was unbelievable.
Yeah, and it had to be because Celtic were resurgent, you know what I mean? Like, Lennon really created a siege mentality.
And he bought really well as well.
Yeah, let's talk about that. Who was responsible for most of the signings? It's a guy that's now with Rangers, John
Correct.
Park.
Yeah, that's right, yeah.
I mean, you look at the signings that he made for Celtic that year, we didn't know any of them, really. You look at Gary Hooper, Emilio Azagiri, Berem Kayo, I think the only one they really got wrong was Efren Juarez, but...
Yeah.
It was...
I think Ledley came in as well, yeah.
Yeah, Joe Ledley, yeah. It was just... Fraser Foster, actually. It was just complete players that you'd never heard of, and they came in, as I say, typical Celtic. The players hit the ground running. They look a team, and they, as I said, this siege mentality that Lennon had created. It was quite a formidable opponent, and you're thinking to yourself, there can't be much margin for error here. We have to be on it, and as you say, 9 wins out of 9, and the start to the Champions League, it's quite an incredible start to the season, and it really had to be, because Celtic, they weren't giving us an inch. But that 3-1 game at Parkhead, that was needed massively, because, as I said, Celtic had got this second wind, and Lennon beat Rangers in his first Old Firm. So this was that was a dead rubber, but this was his first meaningful Old Firm. Celtic were running riot against all these teams. I think this season they actually won 9-0 against Aberdeen, which isn't really a surprise, but yeah, that Celtic were proper. This was a proper challenge, more so than it was the season before. And that 3-1 victory, it really put them in their place and reminded them, like, you're still the champions, by the way. So you've still got a lot of work to do. And psychologically, I think that helped a lot. Yeah, Celtic went on to have quite a good run of form against Rangers, but without that 3-1 victory, I don't think we're looking at 3 in a row.
No, absolutely not. I think that's a pivotal time I think that start kind of wins the title for Rangers, to be honest. But November was an interesting time. Rangers it doesn't end. It's not a brilliant time in the league, but there's rumours in the papers that there's a prospective new buyer in the form of Motherwell-born businessman Craig Whyte. Now, I have to be honest, I'd never heard of Craig Whyte before this report in the Daily Record, but that report in the Daily Record, if you remember the phrase, he was a billionaire Rangers supporter with wealth off the radar.
Mm-hmm. It just, at the end of the day, journalists have got a responsibility to the public to tell the truth, to do their research and tell the truth. And no matter what their agenda is, that's what they're trained to do when they're trying to be a journalist. And to be so far off the mark, it's either a cynical article to try and delude the Rangers fans, or they've been told a lie.
I think it's a mixture of both. Yeah, I think it's a.
They've been told to spin a yarn, a credible source, if you will. I mean, I'm not going to blame David Murray for this, but what's to say David Murray didn't contact Keith Jackson and say, this guy's got this, I've seen this guy's bank balance. Like, we don't know, but all we know is they were spectacularly wrong, and we've never had an explanation as to why. Now, without getting too kind of, too deep at all, but this is the kind of thing that creates situations like Jimmy Savile, for example. The journalists did not do their job right. They did not look into the facts. They did not do their research properly, and look what that caused. And now I'm not comparing the two, like obviously the Savile case to Rangers, but what I'm saying is the actual integrity of the situation is journalists have got a duty, and the duty is to tell the public what exactly is the facts here. And to be so wrong, Craig Whyte's probably not even got $1 million in the bank, and they're saying he had $1 billion. How do you get it that wrong, and how do you still get to keep your job? Well,
the only way you get it wrong is if you get told the story and you don't do your due diligence, you don't do journalism. That is it in a nutshell. There's no journalism going on there. That's getting fed a line and just running with it to try and sell the papers, because at the time that's all that mattered.
That's what really annoyed me. Mark Daly from the BBC, to be fair to him, he'd done a really good investigative.
Yes, he absolutely did.
Series, but that was after the fact. He was presenting all this stuff to us after Craig Whyte had done what he'd done. He had interviews with employees of Craig Whyte who stated that this guy shut the business down as soon as he bought it. He didn't pay her wages, and he put the team in, he put the company in administration. He was asset stripping. All this came out after the fact. Why was that not able to be done before he bought Rangers? Rangers is a massive asset, a massive institution within Scottish society. So it should have that level of scrutiny to protect the club. And obviously, you try to tell me that a strong Rangers isn't beneficial to the Scottish economy. You know what I mean? So that there is obviously a cynical undertone there from the journalists when it came to Craig Whyte purchasing Rangers, because there was just nothing done at all to suggest that this guy was going to be bad for Rangers. And in many ways, I think a lot of the journalists took great pleasure in the fact that it went so tits up because, as I said, we're Rangers, aren't we? We're not exactly the most liked club within Scotland, and I'll never understand how this guy was never caught out before he actually was.
Do you know what bugs me about it though? See like later on when you see like Keith Jackson doing have you ever seen the video of him doing the kind of explanation of all this whole period in Australia? Well, he done an interview in Australia about I think it's called the financial wrecking of Glasgow Rangers or something like that, and he's basically saying what happened. He's explaining everything, and what he does say is, yeah, I broke the ticket story. I broke the story that Craig Whyte was mortgaging season ticket money. What he doesn't mention is the fact that if it wasn't for him, Craig Whyte wouldn't have got past the light of day.
Well, that's it. That's exactly
because the fans immediately bought into that out of desperation, out of the need for a hero that we talk about. But if it isn't for Keith Jackson and Jim Traynor, that doesn't happen.
They facilitated Craig Whyte into power. They absolutely did. Craig Whyte would never have got into the position he got into with Rangers if the journalists done their job. Now, I'm not going to blame the journalists for what happened at Rangers, but at the end of the day, they can't sit back and, take credit for exposing this, that, and next thing after the fact, or even Keith Jackson exposing Ticketus when it actually happened. Hold on a minute, Keith. If you actually done your job, you would have known that this guy was going to do something like that, and this whole thing could have been prevented. But at the end of the day, such as Scottish society, the fact that it went so tits up was probably good for the Daily Record because it sold papers, and that just isn't. It goes against every ethic that a journalist is taught. And as I say, these guys or the vast majority of these guys are still in employment. As I say, Mark Daly, he's not exactly loved by Rangers fans because he wasn't exactly very nice about us. But at the end of the day, you can't argue with what he brought to the table in terms of this is what this guy is like. My only bugbear about it is, right, why are you telling us this now after he's putting us into administration? You should have told us this way before.
Yeah.
And the fact is, it's not a story before we're in administration. It's a story after we're in administration. And, it was... But, I'm standing here blaming journalists or having a go at journalists. At the end of the day, David Murray, he tells us he's a very clever businessman. He's a successful businessman. Nothing gets by Murray, and, you have to, get up pretty early to get one over David Murray. Well, Craig Whyte must have got up at 3 in the morning.
That's why I'll never buy the theory of I was duped. I will never buy it because you're David Murray. Craig Whyte is many things. He's not intelligent. David Murray's intelligent. David Murray's an intelligent guy. There's no way somebody like Craig Whyte does that to David Murray. David Murray saw him coming a mile away. Now that's desperation. That's hoping that.
David Murray needed a fall guy, and he
needed a fall guy. Yeah, I've always held the theory, and I was going to speak about this in the next show. I've always held the theory that either Murray was going to bring somebody in early on to kind of take the fall for the mess, and then he would come in and ride to the rescue, or he would basically just let it happen and hope that it lasted long enough to be nothing to do with him. It's one or the other.
I think, as I said, I think Murray knew fine well administration is something that had to happen. He didn't want to pull the trigger. He needed a fall guy. Craig Whyte was a perfect fall guy. And after the administration, Rangers would rise again and we'd get our house in order. Do I think David Murray thought for a second that you were going to get liquidation, you were going to get Division 3? No chance. I don't think he thought that. But at the end of the day, he took an almighty gamble on his legacy, and he took an almighty gamble with a football club, and both backfired spectacularly, and it makes him look just we'll talk about his legacy obviously at the end of the show, but it's not going to be kind to him at all. And it's his own fault. And as I say, he needed a fall guy. He needed a soft touch. Craig Whyte was definitely a soft touch, you know what I mean? And my only regret is, as Rangers fans, you said, we did look for that hero. We did look for that knight in shining armour. Of course we did. And we believed that we had that. We should have listened to the rebels on the board.
And that's the thing, though, and that's another interesting point. Like Bain and Johnson, I think Bain in particular, he was out saying like you can't sell it to Craig Whyte. Craig Whyte's bad. The problem with Bain is that Bain had never wanted the support on his side up until that point. So why would the support then turn to Bain? What Bain looks like is a desperate man looking to keep his position.
But I think even the fans aren't going to listen to Martin Bain, but let's be honest and be brutally honest about it. How many is were actually concerned when John Gregg was removed? I don't think many is.
Nah.
I think many were just like, okay, that obviously needs to happen. Mm-hmm. That should have been the first thing that we went, right, nah, this isn't happening. There's something going on here. And you had Alistair Johnson coming out telling us, nah, this guy's a fraud, and Paul Murray, and to a certain extent Dave King. And yet, as fans, we have to be honest about it. There will be some that did have their worries, but most of us were just like, nah, you're just jealous because you didn't get the keys yourself, or Craig Whyte's in a position that you'd love to be in. Like, yeah. I think that's how we kind of seen it. And yeah, how wrong were we? And David Murray had these guys in his ear. David Murray was not duped, as you say. David Murray had Alistair Johnson saying to him, this guy is a fraud. But Murray knew this. Murray just needed the fall guy, because Murray didn't want to be the one to pull the trigger on administration.
No, he absolutely didn't. And getting into January, obviously Celtic beat Rangers at Ibrox, Samaras with 2 goals, and it's already shaping up that it's going to be neck and neck with Celtic between the two clubs. But one kind of star man of that early season was Kenny Miller, 22 goals in 25 games, but he was out the door in January. Bursaspor came in, 400 grand, now a low ball offer. Miller was coming to the end of his deal, so you can argue, was this good value? I don't know, but selling their top goal scorer for less than £1 million to me shows they were just desperate to get any money in.
The one good thing about that is it made John Hartson look like an idiot again, because John Hartson had a newspaper article that said Rangers have sold the league for £400,000.
Yeah. It's always funny to see Hartson making an idiot of himself.
Yeah, that was particularly pleasing, but on a serious note, it was right, really, because we obviously went on to win the league, but what are we doing selling a guy who's got almost a goal a game for 400,000 when we're in a league title race here? It's neck and neck. Surely it makes more financial sense to just let him run his contract down, bank that £10 million in Europe, and let him go for free. But at least we're still getting the £10-15 million we're going to get for the European qualification. But instead, how desperate must we have been that £400,000 was far more appealing to us? That's scary. It really, really is. And there was never any talk of Kenny Miller signing a new contract. I wouldn't criticise Kenny Miller for this, because I don't think MD was getting new contracts at this point. So really, the smart thing would have been selling in the summer, but it was such a crucial player to us that we couldn't, because obviously the injury to Jelavic and all this kind of stuff. But yeah, I'll never understand why we decided to do that. People will always say, but Kenny Miller got offered the money. No, I think Kenny Miller would have been more than happy to stay with Rangers for the last 6 months of his deal. And yeah, £400,000 just seemed to be a goldmine to Rangers when it was a pittance. Like,
it was crazy.
What did that £400,000? Where did that get us? You know what I mean? Did that just keep the lights on for a month? Is that how desperate we were? You know
Probably,
what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, 400 grand. Do you know what I mean? And it's so bad. It's just so bad. And it's not, I mean, you have to put it to just the brilliance of Walter Smith to get this team over the line, because he's dealt so many bad hands. And I mean, winning the League Cup as well. I mean, they beat Celtic in that League Cup final. That just shows again, no matter how hard it is, Walter Smith could find a way to beat Celtic.
Yeah, and that League Cup victory was so against the odds for me. Celtic at this point really did have our number. They beat us at Ibrox and they beat us at Parkhead 3-0. We're getting into this game, we're not in great form, again, some injuries. Celtic are rampant, and yet we turn up and we win on the day. Jelavic getting that goal at the end. It was just a Walter masterclass yet again. And again, we talk about important moments in a season. We talk about the 3-1 victory at Parkhead. This, getting the first cup of the season against Celtic, that helped. You know what I mean? That gave us the confidence that we could have a strong finish. And we did, albeit with one slip-up.
Yeah, it was. I mean, it was all neck and neck between Rangers and Celtic. That infamous replay as well at Parkhead. That is the most unbelievable 90 minutes I think I've ever witnessed. Just the whole, that was just mental, wasn't it? That
just on that though, it should never have got to that stage.
No.
For as much praise as we should give Walton, he absolutely deserves every bit of it. We have to criticise his management for the first game. To go on 2-1 at half time and Celtic are down to 10 men because Fraser Forster gets sent off.
Yeah.
Walter decided to, rather than try and kill the game, he decided to try and basically stop Celtic from scoring, and he went defensive, and that was a mistake. That potentially cost us a treble. Well, it did cost us a treble, and yeah, it deserves to be criticised for that. Not that I'm happy to do it or even comfortable to say it, but he got that one wrong, real bad. I'll never know why. Instead of trying to kill the game off when Celtic are quite vulnerable, down to 10 men, they've only got 45 minutes to save their cup campaign, and we decide to just sit behind and hopefully see it out. That was completely the wrong decision. But as you say, that replay was just madness, absolute madness. And I think that stemmed, the Scottish Parliament inquiry, which they had no right to get involved in anything like that.
Nah, it was
madness. Honestly, we stay in a weird wee country.
Yeah, I mean, it was just a mental day. Obviously, the famous spat with Lennon and McCoist, and it was bad. But on the field, it does look as if it's going neck and neck. But this prospective takeover's gathering steam, and it's dominating the headlines come April. We haven't mentioned the tax case yet, and mainly because obviously next week I think we'll go through it kind of with a bit of a fine tooth comb. But I mean, Alistair Johnston's forced to deny, and he's forced to come out and say that the club could go out of business in April because of this tax case. What was the kind of thinking of that at the time? Like this 50 million kind of EBT thing that was kind of in the background. It wasn't. There was a lot more kind of dominating the headlines at this point, but in the background you had this thing that, again, ultimately kind of was another thing that David Murray anchored the club with.
Yeah, to be honest, I didn't really pay much attention of it at the time. I was more sort of concerned with on-field matters, but we'd heard that much from the suits in the last 6 months of this season that you just didn't know what to believe. And yeah, Alistair Johnston's a very credible man. He had no reason to lie, and obviously had legitimate concerns. But the problem that Rangers fans had was, you could say it was arrogance. In fact, it probably is arrogance. Was we're far too big to go under.
Yeah,
Rangers are far too big to go under. So it doesn't matter what they say, it'll never happen. And I think we had that attitude right up into the very, very, day where the inevitable happened after administration and the company get liquidated and all this kind of stuff. And I still think even that day it still hadn't sunk in that we're far too big for this to happen to. And people like Alistair Johnston were coming out with all these kind of things, 50 million tax bill on us, and we just expected it to go away. And I think HMRC, their aggressive pursuit of it, they've got a lot to answer for as well, because at the end of the day, they allowed this to happen on their watch. And I think, Rangers are not the only company to take advantage of tax loopholes, and I just will never understand an organisation who allow it to happen to a certain extent, and then they go, right, hold on, you're taking the piss. Like, no, it should be nipped in the bud right there and then. Like, you're not allowed to do this. And as I said, their aggressive pursuit of it cost them what they were due.
They didn't do the best by the taxpayer.
Exactly. And that's what we all need to look at here. You can say that Rangers were financially immoral at times with their dealings, and you're probably right if you've come to that conclusion. But at the end of the day, HMRC are there to protect the taxpayer and to recoup any money that they can. They might not get it all, and their tactic when it comes to things like this is all or nothing. We'll never ever understand it. And it's, again, I kind of get a wee bit further down the line there, but if to answer your question, was I concerned when Johnston was coming out with this? I'd be a liar if I said yes. I just ignored it because that was the best policy at the time, because you were hearing all sorts of stuff and it would just go away and Rangers would continue to win, and that's all that really mattered to me at the time.
Yeah, and on the field, I mean, we're kind of going off the field, on the field here, but Rangers get a bit of a helping hand thanks to an Alan McGregor save that keeps them in the championship. To be honest, if McGregor doesn't save that penalty, we're not talking about 3 in a row. And obviously Inverness kind of play a wee helping hand as well. But those two kind of big events, how big a turning point were they? First of all, that penalty save, and then obviously the famous game at Inverness where Inverness would beat Celtic 3-1.
Well, the penalty itself was never a penalty, so justice was done there. But,
yeah, no, it wasn't. It absolutely wasn't. Even David Provan said it wasn't a penalty.
That was a culmination of the pressure that Celtic had put on the referees this season. We've not even touched upon this, but this was a season for Scottish football where you had guys from Portugal and Luxembourg refereeing games for a weekend because the referees went on strike purely because of the behaviour of the Celtic manager and the Celtic board. That's a
funny
fact.
How that's not changed.
That is a fact. You know, the Celtic manager and the Celtic board put that much pressure on essentially volunteers, really. I mean, these guys they're paid a decent amount of 500 quid a game or whatever, but you know, they don't have to do it. They're not obliged to do it. They choose to do it. And yeah, they're not perfect. Rangers didn't get decisions correct this year either. And yeah, that penalty was given because of that for me. The pressure was that much. Like Craig Thompson, I think it was.
Yeah, it was, yeah.
He's probably felt to himself, probably isn't a penalty, but it might have been a penalty. I might have missed it, so I'll just give it anyway.
Remember he gave a penalty in the cup final and changed his mind
against Jelic. That was. See, we've seen that happen against USG last week with Rangers. But the referee took advice from the linesman. Craig Thompson pointed to the spot and then changed his mind without any consultation. Never seen it done in my life, ever. Probably was the right decision, but how did he come to that decision? And as we say, Anthony Stokes, clear dive, never a penalty. That game itself, we bit disappointed in Rangers' performance that day. It had sort of kind of the same sort of feel about it as the Stephen Davis 1-0 game. Whereas it was kind of a shootout. Rangers didn't really turn up that day. McGregor does what McGregor does. Fantastic penalty save. At that point, I still didn't see that as being crucial because Celtic were still in the driving seat and I could not see where Celtic were going to drop points. However, you'll remember, such as the Scottish Premier League as it was at the time, it's so unique, the fact that it splits into 6 teams at the top, 6 teams at the bottom. And after the split was done, Celtic actually played one of the bottom 6 teams because mixture pile up. So out of all the games that Celtic had to play, the Inverness game was the banker, you know what I mean? They were in the bottom 6. And yet I remember that I was in work and a customer came up to me and went, "Did you hear Inverness are 3-1 up?" And I was like, "Mate, come on, shut up." Like, I genuinely thought it was time to piss. So I ran out the back to check my phone and I was like, what the hell is going on here? Like, did not see it coming. Had probably resigned myself to the fact that Celtic were going to win the league because I just couldn't see where they were going to slip up. And the most unlikely of slip-ups came, and it was Rangers were never going to relinquish their hold on the title after that.
No,
with 3 games left, and I just knew that we were going to get the job done because we'd been given an almighty break here, and surely we're not going to let this go, and we didn't. Our attitude after that Inverness result was spot on. Absolutely. I remember the first 2 games at Ibrox, Dundee United and Hearts. We get the early goals. We had the games finished for half time. And then, you know, it was, who did we beat in the last day? Kilmarnock. Aye, of course. Of course it was. You know, 7 minutes is all it took in that last game. Attitude was spot on. And it was just amazing feeling, because for me it was an unexpected title. I really had resigned myself to the fact that Celtic were going to win that, even the fact that Samaras missed that penalty. Don't get me wrong, Samaras scores that penalty to win the league, but I still didn't see it as that crucial because I felt the fact that, see, we didn't get the 3 points that day, that was more a kick in the balls to me than you know, looking at the positives that Alan McGregor saved that penalty.
And as you say, there's at this point, Rangers are 3 games away from the title. The 6th of May 2011, David Murray finally sells his controlling stake of 85.3% to Craig Whyte. It's completed that day for £1.
Yeah.
The following day,
that just shows you the desperation level.
Jinker pound was ever exchanged. Like, I know. Do you think that was ever done?
Are you asking me that I think Craig Whyte's even had a pound? No,
I'm genuinely serious. Like,
I honestly don't know. Like, when it comes to token transactions, probably not. He's effective. It's not effective. He has donated his shares. Why would you do that? He's a businessman. He's gonna. You try to tell me he can't make money off this? He owns the vast majority of Rangers Football Club, the Premier Football Club in all of Scotland. Yeah, we're riddled with debt, but you try to tell me you still can't make some sort of money on that?
I think it had just got by that stage for him, though. I think it was just desperation to get out, and just I think he's desperation to preserve his own business.
Yeah, just complete negligence. And yeah, it was. But I have to admit, was I concerned? No, I still wasn't concerned. It just shows you how much a successful football team at the time, that is far more important than the health of your football club.
Yeah.
And I thought, right, okay, I'll be honest with you, right? I actually thought this is how naive I was. I mean, at the time, what age am I? 20, 21. I thought the fact that Craig Whyte didn't have to buy these shares, that gives Rangers more money. That gives him more money to put in.
Yeah.
And, you know, how wrong was I, man?
The next day, Rangers play Hearts, and I was standing at Edmiston Drive that day watching this guy coming down. And I mean, he's the two guys next to him. Names for next week, ladies and gentlemen: Gary Withey and David Greer. Keep a note in their names; they're important next week. But you've got this guy getting interviewed by Chris McLaughlin walking down that street. He does not look like a billionaire. And what were we thinking that this guy was? I mean,
he's a scruffy kind of guy.
He looks. I mean, he looks just like he's come out of bed. He looks an imitation of what a rich guy is.
His shoes only polished. He's not wearing a belt. His tie's no straight. His hair's no brushed. I'll be honest, man, he probably looks like me when I wear a suit. And, you know, I certainly don't have £1 billion in the bank. And this guy's about to sit in the director's box as the owner of Rangers Football Club, and he's about to oversee our 54th league title win.
The thing that gets me with that thing as well, do you remember the Hearts game, like really early on? It was on Sky. 5 minutes, Walter goes into the director's box and he shakes his hand, and White's just slouched like it's as if he's just sitting in his living room, just slouched in the seat and things like that. He's looking back.
Honestly, he's probably not even bored or overwhelmed. He's probably just like thinking to himself, how have I done this? Like, how have I actually...
How quickly can I get tore into it?
This is like, he must have been thinking to himself, like, I am the man. Like,
yeah,
how have I done this? And he's, as you say, man, he's sitting in the director's box with all these dignitaries and all these guys who are richer. Walter Smith was probably richer than him. You get Walter Smith coming up, shaking his hand, and he's getting... I'm pretty sure that day he was clapped into his seat as well by the fans. And
it was. Yeah, I remember the thing. Do you remember I think it was a Blue Order put up a thing. It was like "Step up and pay, Mr. White" or something like that. And just you think back and you think just how naive was the support, but it was a mixture of desperation and they were hoodwinked, and it was that simple.
Well, the only saving grace we can really say is it'll never happen again.
No, it'll never happen again. I mean, you know as well as I do, it's you don't get anywhere anymore. Like you're under pressure straight away.
But this is why, you know, I'm quite critical of some decisions that the board make, and I'll never understand those who will back the board no matter what blindly.
Yeah.
You look at James Bisgrove, right? I think he's got a very questionable track record with Rangers, especially with the crypto deals and all that. And now I'll always question stuff that I feel is a bit iffy. And if we don't have that level of scrutiny as a fan base, 2012 could happen all over again. We need to be able to criticise, question and scrutinise these guys who are the custodian of Rangers Football Club purely because we don't want a repeat of 2012.
No.
You're going to happy clap your way through a tenure of a chairman or a director or whatever. It's not going to benefit anyone. We're as fans, we're there to support the team, but we're also there to hold a certain standard, a certain degree of scrutiny for decisions made. Now, Douglas Park and Bennett and is it Taylor? I think they've asked it for Rangers, but it doesn't mean that they're going to get every decision right, and it doesn't mean that we have to back every decision they make. We're allowed to be outspoken about certain things, and that is what the vast majority of Rangers fans do now, and that's because of the scar tissue. The scar tissue is always going to be there for this generation of Rangers fans who went through 2012, and I actually hope that, you know, I've got a son and a daughter. I actually hope that my scar tissue is actually passed down to them, so that I'm not here, they're able to kind of, you know, scrutinise Rangers the way that I do, because I think that's a really, really important lesson that we need to have learned. And my concern is there is some fans have quickly forgotten about it and will blindly, you know, support anyone who's in a position of power at Rangers purely because it's the staunch thing to do, or that's what fans do. No, we have to be on our toes 24/7, because, you know, what we went through just cannot happen again in any form, in any degree. Even the smallest degree of what happened in 2012 cannot happen again. It has to be, you know, we have to stand up for our football club, and that is a lesson. That is the most important lesson that we have to take away from what the likes of Whyte done to us.
Absolutely, yeah. And as you say, we're going to just talk about two different legacies before we finish up. Smith gets it done. He wins the next 3 games and achieves 3 in a row, and it's a perfect way for him to go out. Obviously, McCoy's is coming in as manager on next week's show, but when you think about Walter Smith in that second spell, he's just this unbelievable, amazing presence in Rangers history for me.
Yeah, look, I can't talk too much about his first spell. I remember it latterly, but the early years I certainly don't remember, because obviously I was born in 1990, and so I can't talk from a position of experience and actually a position of being there. But no one can convince me that his second spell wasn't better than his first.
Yeah.
His first spell, he had to pick up players around Europe. He had a blank checkbook, and he had an adequate Celtic team as his opponent. His second spell, he had, you know, so 4 years, 4 full seasons. He had 3 good Celtic teams. The worst Celtic team he come up against was Tony Mowbray's. He had 3 good Celtic teams. He won, what was it, you know, 8 trophies. 8 trophies and a European final. And they had a fraction of the money available to him that he did in his first spell. His legacy, for me, Scott, this is a big, bold claim, but when you look at the history of Rangers Football Club, people could say Ballstruth was the best. But for me, it's Walter Smith. To achieve what he achieved in the modern era of football, and you look at eras of football, he achieved it over 2 eras of football. The first era was Rangers were a big powerhouse within European football, and as I said, we could pick any team around the world, any player around the world, and we could have probably signed them. And that's easy to do. Well, I'm saying it's easy to do, but it makes your job easier to do. Second spell, football moved on. Money, cash is king. We didn't have the cash, but we were still the kings, and that was only possible under Walter. There's not one guy out there who could have done what Walter done in that second spell. European final, 8 trophies and 3 in a row. Not one guy. It doesn't matter who you are. Guardiola, Klopp, whatever. Sir Alex Ferguson even. I don't think any of them could have done it, but Walter done it. And Walter done it through tactical nous. He done it through a love of Rangers, and he done it through pure dedication to the cause. And not only did he achieve all that, but, you know, his dignity throughout it was intact completely. And for me, that makes him the greatest. I mean, Giovanni Van Bronckhorst could win the treble this year and the Europa League this year. He still will never surpass. No one will ever surpass Walter for me. Doesn't matter. I'd love to 100, and I won't see a better Rangers manager than Walter Smith. No, and I think you've just summed it up perfectly there. I don't even think I need to add anything. But the other side, the legacy of David Murray. We're at the stage now of this journey where the David Murray chapter's closed. We'll bring him up next week, but not obviously as owner. But how different is his legacy? From a fan's perspective, it's completely in ruins. From a player's perspective and manager's perspective, he's still a very popular man now. That kind of, for me, didn't sit right with me. But I spoke to Craig Moore about it. It was more of a kind of private conversation. It was in person, but it wasn't recorded or anything like that. And he totally opened my eyes to it. David Murray made Craig Moore a multi-millionaire.
Yeah.
So why would he hate him?
Exactly.
I get that. I totally get that. And Craig Moore's not the only multi-millionaire that was created by David Murray. There's probably about 50 to 70 of them. So I get the support that Murray still gets from his ex-players and his ex-managers. And you know what? See, as a chairman, he probably was a good chairman to work under. You know, Dick Advocate, I want that player. Murray, okay, fine, you've got him. Walter Smith, I want that player. Fine, you've got him. Alex McLeish probably got a raw end of the deal, but you know, at the end of the day, Alex McLeish was given the Rangers job by David Murray. It wouldn't have happened without David Murray, so I get the loyalty there. But we didn't work for David Murray, and David Murray didn't make us millionaires. So as fans, our perspective and our opinion on David Murray is completely different to the ex-employees of David Murray, and that is, this guy sold us a dream. He delivered in some aspects of it, but ultimately that dream caused a destruction of the likes of which we will never see again. So does the good outweigh the bad? No, because the bad for me, when you actually think about how bad the bad was, it'll just never happen to any football fan in this country ever. Now, people could say, but look at Gretna or whatever, you know. No, Gretna, you know, a Gretna happening, or even a Third Lanark happening, or that kind of stuff, they're nowhere near as big as what Rangers are. They had nowhere near the love, attachment, and, you know, you try to tell me like these kind of supporters of these teams, their mood's affected by the result of one of their matches. Of course it wasn't. It just, you know, Rangers were so big that they have a massive effect on your mood and your life and your happiness. And what happened to us, we were humiliated, you know what I mean? We were the butt of jokes for the best part of 5 years, probably a bit more than that. Even when we came back up, we were still not the proper Rangers as we had known it to be. It's only now, in the last 2 years, we've actually got our Rangers back. So you're talking, what, 8 years of complete rubbing our noses in it and kicking us, and as I said, we made the butt of the jokes. And I'm sorry, but that's all down to David Murray, and the bad outweighs the good for me. And his legacy is one that he hit the self-destruct button on his legacy. He did try to preserve it, and he could have done better preserving it. And if he'd done better preserving his legacy, we're probably talking in more kinder terms about him right now. But he was that selfish that he put himself before the club. Now, no true Ranger, whatever position you hold within the Rangers family, whether it be an employee or a fan, a player, a tea lady, whatever, you never put yourself before the club. You always put the club before yourself. And David Murray failed on that duty, and that to me makes him a pariah within the Rangers fans. I mean, that might be harsh, but that's just my opinion. I think he'll never be welcome back, and nor should he. He'll never have his Hall of Fame moment, and nor should he. And yeah, when we talk about 9 in a row and the, you know, expansive, sexy football of Dick Advocate, there's always going to be that wee sort of kind of, don't want to say asterisk next to it, because I think that's too harsh, but there's always going to be that, yeah, we've done that and we love that, but I would rather not think about the contribution that Murray made towards it. That's how I see it.
I think you summed up two legacies there totally right. I think Murray's just, it's hard, and we live in the world of cancel culture where you can have 10 brilliant things in your career, but one thing can just ruin it. And I think that's it. With Murray. He can talk about 9 in a row, he can talk about Gascoigne, Loudrop, he can talk about the club deck, he can talk about everything that he did, and he did do good things, but nothing eclipses what the bad he did.
Yeah,
that's it in a nutshell.
And the bad, you know, as I said, the bad isn't even what happened to the football club. The bad is the embarrassment he caused every single one of us. And that you can't do that to a legion of fans when there's not one Rangers fan that didn't have any sense of embarrassment throughout this 2012 to 2020 period. We all had some sort of level of embarrassment. And it all stemmed from the actions of one man, which is David Murray, unfortunately.
I can sort of not forgive, but I can sort of understand the gambling aspect of trying to be successful. But what David Murray did doing that was he allowed the club to be. He opened up the club to sharks, and that's what we see here.
That's it. Like, if I can try and bring an analogy to your focus, if you go into the bookies with a tenner and you put a bet on and you win 120 quid, you can easily live with yourself by spending that 20 quid, but you're going to keep that 100 quid, aren't you? So if you're going to gamble and you're not a serial gambler, if you're a clever gambler, you're going to have some sort of backup plan in case it goes tits up. And for me, with Murray, it was all or nothing. And Murray chased the dream, and the dream, by the way, wasn't 10 in a row or having this amazing legacy over the stadium. The dream was the Champions League, and then when his opportunity passed him by in the Champions League, we had a great opportunity in the 90s to at least try and get that Champions League. When that passed him by, he didn't have a dream anymore because there was no more targets. His hunger and desire left him bit by bit to the point where he was a shell of his empty self, and he was lumbered with this football club that was causing him problems in his business life and his private life, and he just lost complete interest. And the consequence of that was he didn't care really about anybody but himself. He just wanted rid of the albatross that was Rangers around his neck, and that, what he should have done, he should have identified that he'd lost his passion, his hunger, his desire a long time ago, and he should have sold the club a long time ago. But instead, he created more and more issues, which affected his legacy more and more.
And that's that. And we'll go into the next chapter next week where we talk about what happens in the new era and how quickly it fades to dust when Ali McCoist becomes manager and Craig Whyte gets his shoes under the table, and quickly we see that it's just doomed to fail. Chris, it's been an absolute pleasure to go through this time with you. I've really enjoyed it. Thank you very much.
I've enjoyed it as well. Well, some aspects of it anyway. I mean, it was just PTSD on it, but it's been a pleasure, mate. Thanks very much for asking me on.
Really appreciate it. It's been a pleasure. Thank you very much to everyone that's tuned in, and please join us next week on the next chapter of the Rangers journey.